Good afternoon or good evening. It's a real quick introduction, so we can start right away. We are going to talk English because they told us it would be better for all of you. But sometimes I could imagine we are switching over to German and then we are maybe waiting for your translation because there are some words which are really very special in German and maybe we don't find the expression in English. I'm very glad to be invited to, talk with Wilhelm Schürmann, who is, in my view, one of the most fascinating collectors, just because he started somewhere in the 1980s and 90s, I think, to really think as a collector with own terms, not bound to, traditional avant-gardes anymore. It's like touching the ideas of the art of his proper generation and following generations. And this was, in my view, a real break, because in the 1960s and 70s, especially in the Rhineland, there was a very strong authorship or authority, one could say, of a certain generation of artists, which were the late avant-gardes. And I think it's something which also created a big question at the end of the 70s, the beginning of the 80s, how to go further and how to change also maybe a perspective of contemporary art. For all those of you who don't know Wilhelm Schürmann and his biography so well, I just want to make some small kind of detail informations as an introduction. He was growing up as someone in the Ruhrgebiet with an idea to do photography, but the parents said, well, you should study something real. And so he started to study chemistry in Aachen, which is close to the border of Holland and Belgium. And then during his studies, he already, I think, started to become the photographer, even if the parents maybe didn't know or didn't really check. And then it was a switch in the 1970s, right after the degree, to become a gallerist for photography. So the famous gallery of Rudolf Kicken was originally a gallery, Lichttropfen, owned by Rudolf Kicken and Wilhelm Schürmann. And later?
Schürmann and Kicken.
Schürmann and Kicken. So it's important because the A to Z is something which is very special. Yeah, and then there was even an appearance of this gallery at Art Basel in 1976. But then in 1977, the end for you to be a gallerist, and you started to become a collector. And there was also a certain reason, like to change maybe the site, because you like to collect, to keep things, right?
Yeah, I had no idea that this could be called collecting. But I proudly showed what I did find from the history of photography and showed it interested people, but I said, but it's not for sale. So congratulations, very good gallerist. And I realized there the first time vaguely that obviously I have a collector's mind and like to keep things for at least a very long while till I understand what the hell is going on with this thing. It's more like that, finding out what I myself could not think or make myself. With the gallery, it was at the same time when I started as a photographer, and I started in '72. I did buy my very first image ever in another gallery, and they always told us what were the most significant photographers of their time or our time. And we realized, oh, there are other 5 or 7 names, so maybe we should show them. So it was a little competition between the only 2 galleries for photography which were existing. It was nothing more. It was no market existing. It was more about making things available or visible.
And you said something very very interesting, calling photographers collectors. A photographer is a collector because he or she is collecting images. And so maybe there is not a real big turn, but there is something which is even logical in this parallel.
You see something in real life and you make a photograph of it. So I was always a photographer. I was taking pictures, not making pictures. And you keep it in whatever format with you, and you make an image out of that. But you can make it in a very small size or in a bigger size, but you could carry it with you. So it was a movable, portable little something, and that was always very fascinating. And of course then you see that there are connections between images, and I think in that moment this kind of in-between situation is starting to generate something what is der Zwischenraum, the distance between things. And this is all about exhibition, it's all about coercion, and everything what I intend to handle as a collector myself today, I think it's rooted there, you know.
And is
der Zwischenraum zwischen den Dingen, zwischen dem Betrachter und dem Bild, der Zwischenraum zwischen den Bildern und der Zwischenraum zwischen den Denkweisen. Als distance, you know.
Yeah, it's the in-between zone, or yeah, the in-between.
Yeah. But Zwischenraum is, you know, it's defining a space itself already. Yeah.
It's a space. Yeah. And there is something, I think, which is really different compared to so many other collectors, and it's like you're collecting things which are not a big value to others. You were collecting film photos in Los Angeles. You were walking around, checking for documents. You were collecting bits and pieces. And is this connected to maybe also to this past or the present time as a photographer? So not to care for the value, but for the content, and also maybe going beyond a traditional art collector?
I think definition of value is always a trap. You know, it didn't interest me, never. And also, you know, I was not collecting these things. Ich habe die zusammengetragen. Da waren die Dinger und ich habe sie mitgenommen und ich habe sie aufbewahrt. So I was keeping them. And of course, after a while, they meant something very different than I ever intended. And when I firstly did an exhibition from our archive or our collection or my collection or whatever, I saw that these documents, let me call it documents, they enrich the entire situation. Or when I'm defining, you know, an exhibition with photography, let me say portrait photography, Klaus Honneff invited me in the 90s to be the co-curator for that. We couldn't go along about the concept because I wanted including also those portraits which were hanging über der Kasse in einem Supermarkt, wo die Kassiererin mit einem Foto vorgestellt wurde. Das war für mich genauso eine wichtige Fotografie wie eine, weiß nicht, Fine Photography Printqualität. Und das war für den neu. Für mich war das Alltag. So habe ich auf die Dinge gesehen. Ich habe da keine Unterschiede gemacht. Ich habe aber bei den Bildern, I made already with these images choices. You know, not every image is of same significance or the same interest and so on. And when it was something I would like to keep, fine. For instance, all these flyers of Raymond Pettibone, it was not about money. I just took them with me and kept them. Or these little books he made, it was never about money. When we started to discover Raymond Pettibone, it was not even clear if I would name an artist, or is he a cartoon artist, or is he a designer of record covers, I think those things did cost at the time $50 or $100 or something like that. Or at the same time, you know, those posters, designs, work on paper, what would you call them, of Sister Corita Kent, you know? The sister, because a friend in Los Angeles told me I should go to this church, the Immaculate Heart Community. It was a school, and there I could buy very normally these things of Sister Corita. So that was hundreds of years ago. It was never about money.
You've been for a long time a professor for photography and have taught so many students, and at the same time you also, in my view, you taught also the audience to have a different perspective onto art and to see another kind of exhibitions. When did it start that you did exhibitions, that you curated? And is this something which you would also set into a parallel to being a professor? Teaching, well, perception?
No, never. You know, only I realize when you look at something, it's different from when you talk about something. If you buy something and you call yourself a collector, it's different when you show that from a private collection, from a private ownership in public. And so I found it interesting to make this change visible or visual. And the first exhibition on that level very consequently started when a museum in Aachen, my hometown, was asking me if I would like to make an exhibition there, Zürmond Museum at the time. And we had a piece by Georg Herold with a nice title, Room Enough, spelled in the English version, so Space Enough. And I gave that exhibition the title after this work. So it told a lot without meaning anything. And you know, that was always something where I started from. So it was, for me, always very significant never to demonstrate ownership in an exhibition of a private collection. For me, that would have been always embarrassing. You know, very often the most boring collectors' exhibitions are, for me, those demonstrations of ownership. I have the biggest, or maybe I'm the greatest, whatever.
Question which is maybe in art fairs very important, and other collectors are asking these questions maybe to you more often. What is for you kind of the speed, the patience, the maneuver to decide for this or that work of art?
Yeah, I think to have time. I think this is necessary. Out of that reason, it's complicated, for instance, to buy for me things on an art fair, because normally I'm not given that time because I have to make a decision. I see something that yes or no, because there is competition in the game. But this time it was a very lucky situation. For instance, you have to be ready for something. I was looking at some gallery, something which I put on hold, and in front of that room where I stepped in to look at that, there was something else. What I couldn't believe, it was an early work by General Idea from '89, and I had no idea that this kind of things are existing. So I canceled another thing on hold to buy that without any time. I just said, yes, I take that, you know. So there is no rule. I have no idea. It just has to be there, and it has to be physically this kind of object where I see the energy is going on, you know. It's really translating something what I have now then a long time to find out what is happening there.
I experienced that you very often mentioned there are things which are very, very fascinating or even very important, and they don't get sold, and so you can have the patience, and good things are not for the quick sale.
But there's also a difference. Years ago, at an art fair, I even don't remember, maybe it was in Berlin or so, I saw something I found interesting enough, but couldn't decide to take it because I wasn't ready for this strange kind of art. And I did finally buy it, I think after 4 years. It was a cardboard box by Bernd Lohaus. It was still in the same gallery. The price was still the same. It was not sold. Fine, everything okay. I'm absolutely convinced this is definitely still possible. I did buy here a piece by Ernst Caramel, the nicest painting I ever saw on wood. And it's from 2007. And I'm amazed that nobody saw that before. It's 10 years, I couldn't believe it. You know, it's always like that. You have to know what you are looking at. I started recently again buying photography, not collecting photography, just buying photography because it's there, costs nothing. For instance, I just recently did buy a piece by Lisette Model again, because it was not sold on auction. Lisette Model was the teacher of Diane Arbus. And it was just 600 euro. A master vintage, but I just couldn't believe it. It was having a stamp with a handwritten something on the background. And I have a good friend, he is the grandson of August Sander, and I sent him an image of the backside of the photograph that, do you know what it means or what? And he said, oh, this is my handwriting. And actually I know that is the print Lisette gave to me to make the reprint after that model of the fine print, 600. I still can't believe it. You know? And this is an everyday situation. If you look at auction catalogs of photography in the moment, you find masterpieces just for nothing. Absolutely nothing, but you have to know what you're looking at. Very easy.
For a while, you had an exhibition space, or it was more like a storefront next to, at Rosa-Luxemburg-Platz, next to Volksbühne. Several collectors had this idea during the last years. And you had something, I think, special because it was also an open vitrine. You would look at it from outside. It was rather modest. It was not a big thing. But then after a while, you closed that shop or that vitrine. What was the reason
these things,
to
of
start?
course, non-profit space.
Yeah. What was the reason to start? What was the reason
The reason
to
was
end?
very easy. You know, Christian Nagel was helping out to find the space. At that time, first time I did buy something with a collector's colleague. So we did buy the piece together and both got an invoice of 50% of the money value. So we owned it together, and at that time, Flick came to Berlin and making this public appearance, and I wanted to make a little statement in opposite to that, or against, or next to it, saying, look, you can even own things with two people, and so it's not about ownership, just make something accessible. How could it be? And I asked several people, including Christian Nagel, don't you know a place for, let me say, just to make this kind of exhibition? It was in German, you call it a little Rechthaberei. And he said, you know, Johann König is just closing his space here and finding a bigger space. Maybe Rente, Miete ist doch für ein Jahr. And we started with that and finally nearly did it 5 years, and then it got to be routine and started to be boring. You know, always when I have to do the next exhibition, why? So you always have the question, why should I continue that when it's turning out something what is not really challenging yourself?
You are thinking and working and distributing a lot in media. Once we called them the new media. You were very early active in the internet. You were even getting young artists together to work intensely in the internet for critics. You offered, or you always said, you should publish in the internet. So this whole communication, which is now for us a presence nowadays, was something you very early wanted to create and you wanted to be part of. You are a fan of Instagram and you are working with this distribution every day. So what is for you now, well, the mediation, the communication of art, and does it change anything to traditional media like the gallery, like the institution of a museum? What is now for you the now in media, in all this, what we define as communication?
Of course, like always, many, many different realities next to each other. So, for to give you an example, it started with the with the internet, of course. You could, for instance, giving an example with eBay, you had suddenly the flea market option with a search engine. You know, and I had several work by Katie Nolan regarding Patty Hearst. So I looked for paraphernalia regarding Patty Hearst. So I feed in Patty Hearst. P. White was the earliest person ever finding things through eBay. She was always looking for scarves by, what's her name again? Vera, polka dot scarves, and had finally, I think, 5,000, and the sport was not paying more than 99 cents for a silk polka dot Vera scarf, and she, you know, organized them after colors, beautiful. Someday I'm sure that will be visible, institutional. And so I looked for Patty Hearst, and she said, if you look for something really rare, feed in Hearst misspelled. So I did write Hearst, H-U-R-S-T, and I did find without any other bidder the most amazing post I always was looking for. So, you know, this misspelling and the non-knowledge is helping there suddenly in a very strange way. And now with Instagram, I'm doing this once a while since last fall. It's something what I realized recently also here on this fair, what is very surprisingly interesting. You meet people, you know this or that person, but suddenly you have kind of a family feeling. It's like you are meeting an old buddy. So you have immediately, without any big distances, you have a common language ground, and you dig into something what otherwise, with all this kind of introduction blah blah, it's already there because you are visually already on their path and the other way around, and of course you find things you never was looking for, blah blah blah, the usual thing. I think this is a new form of kind of family communication of another kind. I even found something what I did buy from an artist and realized I had looked at his work in a gallery already without knowing him. And typically it was a very tiny piece that was written on, I like it when you don't like it. And I said, oh, that could be my, my idea of dealing with things. So I asked him, via these options Instagram is offering, if that is something, what is it? Is it a piece of paper, or is it what, and so on? And I now own this thing, and I definitely will bind it in someday in a very nice way, you know.
And you're also
Again, it was not about money, it was very inexpensive.
and you're doing photography yourself all time, and you're doing your walks and your bike rides, huh? And
But not during it, but I see something, and then sometimes I have the camera, a little camera with me, so always, every day, something is visually interesting. I think the common ground is always the light. It's always a light thing, and then the question, what is it making visible what otherwise you wouldn't have recognized. So it's always also something what I like to keep with myself, to be able to look at it again. Yeah, very selfishly. I want to see that again, what I saw there.
something very special is, I think, in your collection, well, which is, one should always underline, a collection of Gabi and Wilhelm Schürmann. So you're collecting and thinking and, well, living together. And I think this...
And living with art.
And with art. And so there is something which is leading to the now. So you started somewhere in the mid and late 70s. How would you define this now today? So 2017, you're seeing a new generation of artists maybe. What is your feeling for today? And how would you now describe maybe also a new perspective in art at the moment?
I can't think like that, you know. It's not a question of new or not new. There is a continuity in art-related questions, and depending from material or materialization, or you know how you realize something, you know, the artist better knows what he or she is doing. And it's for me always, even in the most complicated thing, it's about looking at something in a visual language, and then when that is interesting enough, then I start digging a little bit deeper, what is it about? But if this first impulse is not coming, forget it, it's not for me. And again, I like it if you don't like it. The other way around, I'm running away as a collector when everybody is, you know, stepping into something what is the hit of the collector season. I could name names, but I don't do that.
And there is a very nice term which I can translate, which I learned from you. It's links blinken, rechts abbiegen. So flashing to the left and turning to the right or something. So like
dealing with disinformation.
Dealing with disinformation. And then there is another term which is also pretty important, and maybe also for the generation of artists that you collected very early and that you communicated with very early. It's the term Deutungshoheit. There is no Deutungshoheit anymore. And this is like sovereignty or authority in setting up what is a value, what is important and what not. What is good, what is bad, what is quality and what is bullshit. So
yeah, I
think
that's an interesting moment in time, because this key question of power, power about being public, power about making things visible or accessible. This is gone now. Everybody has, nearly everybody has the possibility to make this, what he finds interesting, accessible, without asking somebody who has to decide yes or no. And I think this is new, and that opens up a very, very big field of new opportunities, or different opportunities. So the power game in terms of visual accessibilities is very different than ever. You know, we had in Cologne in the 80s very much the situation that even not a handful, that individuals said thumbs up or thumbs down, and if not so, it was not the right thing because it was kind of, should I say, kind of a clan thinking. This clan on the other side to another clan, or family thinking, or group, or network, blah, blah, blah. So forget it. This is, God thanks, not working anymore. And so that means also the power of collectors is gone. Maybe the power of money is something else we are not talking about. But the big fun is that even with no money, you can make the difference. You can really make decisions for things which make the difference. I think we are in the situation now, that there is no Deutungshoheit, there is not a common agreement, the next thing is this and this. You can read it from some known collectors, oh, the next big thing is art from Africa. Oh, really? These kind of things always is eventually hope for a market, but think about ownership, to demonstrate ownership from art from another country. Why should you ship that to Germany, to Europe, to America, to whatever? For me, unthinkable. Make things stronger where they come from, and how could you support that, and how could you make that possible? Are there options, or you can co-finance something? I think we are in the situation now, we have to make choices. Maybe that will be the difference of the next interesting time. There is everything accessible, but the difference is somebody has to make a choice out of this, was heißt es, unendlichen Möglichkeiten.
All these
Everything is
possibilities, all
possible.
these choices which are possible.
Yeah.
And maybe because I'm running an institution, what is your feeling about the role of institutions now and in future? So how do you think culture will be like now, or what is maybe a good perspective for culture that you see at the moment?
Well, I guess the thing is always you have to watch the whole situation. Like when in the 80s Richard Prince said normality will be the special effect of the 90s, that meant you must know what is normality or what is a special effect. And when now every politician on terms of institutions is dreaming of events, what have you to do that your deine Einschaltquote, your what you said in English,
Number of visitors,
your rating, how many visitors are coming,
ratings,
and how many cars are parked on your parking lot, which you don't have, then maybe the right thing to do is to believe in an institution where this Yves Klein is living in this corner, and you find it without a plexiglass protection also in 4 years, and still in perfect shape and not permanently disorientated through permanent travels to all these places. Maybe that. But only this makes sense in comparison to the entire situation. When everything is always living at the same place, maybe it's good to moving things again. So I think there is no rule anymore. It's the credibility of the individuals to make it einleuchtend. Chris Williams, this artist I like a lot from Los Angeles, told me yesterday again which 2 German names he likes so much. The first one is Apfelmäuschen, and the second was Heiligenschein, whatever you translate that. You see, sometimes to play with the German language is untranslatable.
And you were always someone playing in an amazing way with titles and with terms. And, well, you were taking from Martin Kippenberger, but sometimes it just sounded a little like Martin Kippenberger, and it was you. And it's,
Yeah, that happened.
I think also something which was killing authority, which was killing power.
Yeah, sometimes the title makes the difference and gives you the insight to something. Kippenberger was, of course, very good in that. And I was working on an exhibition, shortly before or shortly after, a typical photography question that you photograph something and that keeps memory, but in the same moment, what drives you nuts as a photographer, everything you push the button and the thing is history already. So how you deal with contemporary issues, and that of course is the space in between. So just because the file on the computer did not allow this long word shortly before, shortly after, I just put it kurz davor, danach, and that was the title. Kurz davor oder kurz danach was wrong, but kurz davor, danach was a totally different meaning. And it was exactly this again, der Zwischenraum, and then was that the subtitle, Gegenwart als Zwischenraum. So it worked with dealing, or it came out in dealing with these language things. And we made this exhibition, Das Gespinst, after drawing of Monica Baer. And the next thing was from a Belgian artist, Le Souffleur, a work of his. And maybe the next exhibition next year in a Vienna museum will coming from a British artist, Michael Simpson, who made a painting with the title, The Shadow of Ideas. Maybe, I'm not sure yet.
So, well, I don't know if anybody of you has a specific question to a collector who is, well, also, I would say, not only a collector of images, but also, or of art, but also a producer of communication, of images himself. Is there anything you would like to know, or which we should have mentioned as a topic? Oder auch auf Deutsch? Irgendetwas. Wir wurden nämlich gerade darum gebeten, dass jetzt, glaube ich, unsere Zeit so ungefähr abgelaufen
sonst können
ist.
wir das gleich im kleinen Raum, im kleinen Kreis noch persönlich machen.
Ja.
Ne? So im Öffentlichen immer Fragen stellen, ist immer dasselbe Problem.
So I would say the official part is now finished. I thank you for your attention, and maybe you heard in these last 2 minutes there is a huge exhibition coming up somewhere in Vienna, and you should just watch out for that. I can imagine it's super fascinating again, because these exhibitions of that collection, Schirmann, are something which are, well, even if you say it's a little too didactical to say so, but I think it's about perception and about a way to deal with art in a different way. So many thanks, and thanks to you. Vielen Dank. Und ja, und whenever you want to join us now, please come around. Or we are kicked out, I don't know. Dankeschön.